I've watched way too many Canon R5 and R6 videos the past few weeks, the past month or two actually. I've watched all of them. Look at my YouTube playlist, like all of them have this red bar. Some of them I've watched multiple times. Those of you who know me would ask why, because 3 years ago I switched over to Sony. The reason simple, of course, Canon is what got me into photography way back with like the G5, like a little point and shoot thing. Then I got the Canon 20D, and then still have it. I'm glad I never sold this one. The Canon 5D, original Canon 5D. Mark II I have, then I bought the Mark III, then I bought the Mark IV. The Canon 5D series, for me, I photographed over 300 weddings with 5Ds and probably, well, at least 400 portrait sessions a year with the Canon 5D series. And so when I made the switch to Sony, people are like, well, what's going on? And for me, the switch was, the thing that I couldn't live without once you experience it was the IAF from like the Sony A9, which is my webcam right now, and the Sony A7 III. The IAF, once you experience it, there's no going back. And what's hilarious is now that so many of the DSLR, like the working pros who've been using these forever, and they are getting their hands on the Canon R6 and R5 and their minds are blown. It's, pretty much like I was in 2017 with Sony, because the eye autofocus is a game changer. And so I have really been enjoying it. And I'll be honest, when I look at a Canon body still, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. It has like rounded edges and it's just so beautiful. And the RF glass is so beautiful just to look at, let alone the images that come out of it. Like, really smitten by that RF glass. But I really love to hear like when working photographers get their hands on it too. And so I got an email from Caitlin James, and she reviews the R6 and she loves it. And I went and watched this video, and then I watched another one with like her and her videographer where they had a little bit more of a long form discussion. But one thing that she said, and that there's some hesitation that you could see with the eye autofocus, is that what happens on those times when I just need to focus on something else besides an eye.
Right. It can specifically pick out the eye and will always prioritize the eye over anything else.
So now I have a question about that.
Yep.
Let's say you're doing a shot where you have a bridal party lined up, but you bring the bride and groom out in front and they're sharing a kiss, but everyone else is looking towards the camera. So the bride and groom's eyes aren't as noticeable, but everyone in the back is smiling and it notices it. Can you turn that feature off, and would you have to turn it off?
I'm sure you can turn it off. I don't know specifically because I've obviously never shot these cameras.
And so that's honestly what I'm making this video about. I'm hoping that I can give you a tip from the A7 III that I've been using here I've had this set up like this for a few years now. What I have done is I have mapped the AF on button back here to initiate eye autofocus, and then the one right to the right on this camera is the AEL. I have reassigned that button to just start autofocus. So begin the autofocus like a halfway press, but it's back here in whatever mode that I have it on. And what I have my mode on is tracking, and I can actually move that point. It's like called a flexible spot. I can move it around still with my trackpad. And all I do is I just leave that spot kind of like in the upper right kind of quadrant as far as the intersection of the rule of thirds. I just kind of leave it over there to where if I ever need to grab the focus of any object, I just use this button. As long as I keep this button pressed down, it's going to track that object, whether it's a face, whether it's an eye, whether it's a flower, whether it's anything. It's going to track it as it moves and as I recompose. So very easily I have the best of both worlds. Eye autofocus for portraits and for that person that's closest to me, and then tracking, lock on AF tracking with the other button. And you don't have to switch any modes or anything. It's just both of those functions are there available for you literally with the press of a button an inch over. So the question is, can we do this on Canon? Well, because I have watched every single video on the R5 and R6, I did notice something really a month or so ago when I watched the R6 review from DP Review.
you know, really the implementation is quite nice too. You really want to have a camera that you can easily set up for autofocus. We like to link the tracking focus to a focus point. You do have to set that up though, it's not on by default, but at that point, it's very easy. I can use the touchscreen, I can use the joystick, and now it's just gonna track that focusing point. I can move it around. If it's a person's face or an animal, I can set up to this prioritized for that. I mean, frankly, it is a very effective, very easy to use autofocusing system. And if Sony's the gold standard, I would say the Canon is just like knocking on that door.
Okay, I guess I forgot to unmute the microphone for the ending of this video, the last minute or so. So here is the redo. What we can gather from the DP review video is that even if on the Canon R6 or R5, even if you cannot map two different buttons to initiate AF in two different modes, so to speak, you can at least start your tracking from the box, from the AF area, the selection point. That way, you can actually just leave that box somewhere near the center of the frame, because when you initiate AF with that like back button press or even halfway down, it's going to stick to that no matter what, whether they move or whether you recompose. I can assure you after shooting with this for several years now, that will be quicker than using the little thumb joystick to move that around. I know it's a lot to get used to because you have that muscle memory, but you just want to lock on, recompose, and then shoot. It will track that, especially through that tiny little recompose. So give that a try, Canon users. If I can get in a Canon R6 at some point, I plan on trying it. I will dig deep into the menu and see if there's something similar, but I think that you all will absolutely love IAF, especially when you know that you can still focus on something else when you need to. All right, guys, hope that helps. And by the way, I haven't made a YouTube video in like 3 years. However, I am planning on being brave and making many more. Subscribe if you want to, and thanks.